Hey all, Alex here at your home of the Music Deep Dive, and welcome back to part 7, I think, of this record collection tour. So, thank you so much, as always, for continuing to check out these videos. We are still moving along pretty steadily here, so I'm not going to blabber. We'll get right on into it. We were in the middle of the seas last time. I think we left on Mr. Clapton. And so, next on the bucket list is this compilation album of Patsy Cline's Stop the World and Let Me Off. Patsy Cline is really, even for being as much of a pioneer as she is, I think a little bit underappreciated in just how much she brought to the world of country music as far as opportunities for female performers. We remember Loretta Lynn and Dolly Parton because they came right afterwards, and Patsy's career was cut short very tragically. But I think there's still a level of credit that she's deserving of. And even if I don't believe she played a major role in writing her songs, so I'm going purely off of memory. Still, there's some of the best records, some of the best Nashville records of the era. And this compilation doesn't have actually very many of the most famous ones anyways. There's some really good ones. Like I Cried All the Way to the Altar. How Can I Face Tomorrow? I like Honky Tonk Merry Go Round too. So, lots of good songs, but that particular compilation does not have a lot of her most famous ones. So, but I'm happy to have it, and I'd like to pick up more of her stuff at some point. Okay, this record holds a special place in my heart. It's my one Leonard Cohen album, and it is 2016's You Want It Darker. Here's the thing. I didn't get into Leonard Cohen until after his death. I knew who he was. I knew generally his fame from other people, other communities that I was a part of, but I hadn't really explored his music. I was generally aware in October 2016 that he had released a new album, and that it was very, there were a lot of themes of mortality, and I'd kind of put it on my to-listen list, actually. And then I think it was a Thursday night when they announced that he died, and this was the Thursday night right after the 2016 election. So my college campus that I was on, it was kind of swathed in a lot of protests, a lot of upset people. And I remember listening to this album under that context, under just the complete chaos and confusion and unrest that was going around in November 2016. And I can't shake that association, nor do I really want to. But even though I've now listened to all of his albums multiple times and I'm a big Cohen fan, this album in my heart I think is always going to be number one. I just love the sort of minimalist production on a lot of these songs, Cohen's approach, the depths of his voice, just the way that Cohen's voice evolved over the years, where I say evolved, it's really more of just kind of he loses his voice and his voice just kind of goes lower and lower and lower until he's kind of just croaking it out, essentially, on this album, Speak Singing. But I love the themes. I love the idea of confronting mortality, something that was a really, unfortunately, common in 2016 with records. But I think every single song on there is very strong, although the title track probably has the most gravitas and just kind of hits you like a truck right off the bat. Great album, fantastic album even. Judy Collins. My only Judy Collins album. I have one or two others of hers on CD. Wildflowers is her strongest. I think most people would agree with that. She Collins is one of those people who I think gets a little bit overlooked in the 60s female um, folk singer songwriter, kind of. Again, she wasn't really a songwriter, and I think that's held against her. But as an interpreter of songs, I think she is pretty pretty great, and I think she's arguably at her peak at this point. Um, Ironically, a couple of Leonard Cohen songs on here, "Sisters of Mercy" and "Hey, That's No Way to Say Goodbye." A couple of Joni Mitchell songs on here as well, including "Both Sides Now," which was Judy's biggest hit. But she does have a couple of songs on here that she actually wrote. Um, so I don't know. There's talent there, and I think especially while Judy is still with us, which she gratefully is, um, I think hers is a catalog that bears potential re-examination. I think people should be giving her a little bit more credit than maybe is commonly done, um, compared to some of the other performers of the era. Okay, my Phil Collins collection is a little bit strange. I have four albums of his, and probably only one of them is going to be predictable. And that is this one, "No Jacket Required." Um, it is his best album, I think. It's the strongest collection of hits that he put together, one of the strongest collections of pop songs I think you'll find in the 1980s. I don't know. I think there's a whole debate about Phil Collins, which I'm not going to engage in right now, but um, I am of the opinion that the, I'm sorry, I'm just looking at the sweat on his face, and this cover makes me laugh. There's all these debates about the merit of Phil Collins' solo work compared to Genesis, and the work of 80s Genesis compared to 70s Genesis. I like it all. I like it all. Um, I think, however, there is much more of a noticeable difference between solo Collins and, you know, self-titled Genesis, Invisible Touch Genesis, We Can't Dance Genesis, that I think people give credit for. I think the other members of Genesis, I don't know that they didn't restrain Collins, that's the wrong word to use, but I think they balanced him out a little bit and added their own kind of musical ideas, and that's what helps elevate something like Invisible Touch, which I think is a genuinely fantastic pop album. Um, Although No Jacket Required, frankly, is right along with it. I think both of them are terrific records. And then we're going to get to, so amazingly, I have three of the I think it was 2015, 2016 that these were done, the Atlantic reissues of his solo albums with the alternative covers. So Both Sides, this is a record I believe I showed in my Record Store Day 2023 video. Do I like it very much? Not really. This is the point where Collins does kind of go sour for me, just in terms of being pretty dull, adult contemporary. But Both Sides it's not an offensive album. None of his albums are really offensive, apart maybe from one. There's one that's borderline that we'll get to. But not this one, although I think some people will be surprised. Testify. So first off, Testify is actually a very hard album to find for anything approaching a reasonable price. You try to get this thing on the internet, you're probably paying at least like $75, $80 for it, if not three digits. But I randomly found this in a Madison, Wisconsin Barnes & Noble. There was one copy of it for $32. And Testify is not what I would consider a good album. It's very long and very boring. But I couldn't pass up that deal because I do want to be complete on Collins at some point, and a lot of his other records are pretty easy to find. I just haven't picked them up yet. So, will I ever listen to this again? I mean, probably, but it's pretty low on the totem pole. I've heard most of these later albums, I think, just once. But this record, oh boy. This is the one that I actually have a major problem with. This is Going Back, or The Essential Going Back, based off this vinyl reissue. I don't know. I don't like the Phil Collins re-recordings of these songs really much at all. I think this is pretty solidly the worst thing in his catalog. And it's not his fault. I mean, I appreciate the enthusiasm. I appreciate that, he's trying to reinterpret these songs that clearly mean a lot to him. I don't think he's doing this for anything else other than his own personal enjoyment. And I say, go for it, man. Go for it. And why not sell it? Why not sell it? Some people will be interested, I'm sure. But not me. It is, I don't think his voice in, 2010 era, whenever this was recorded, I don't think his voice was up to snuff for recording any of those songs. So, I don't know. I get nothing out of it. But, again, happy to own it. That one was only like 22, which is like half the price you will pay for it, like, on the internet. So, picked that up in the same Madison Barnes & Noble, actually. But anyways, on to better records. A Love Supreme. Is this my favorite John Coltrane album? I guess probably. I don't know that Giant Steps would beat it. Just show the little gatefold in here. I don't know that Giant Steps would beat it. Blue Train definitely wouldn't for me. I think this is one of the first jazz albums I think that I did actually intentionally listen to because of how acclaimed it is on Radio Music or whatever other music aggregation websites you might think of. But it's one that had to grow on me quite a bit. Kind of Blue was kind of immediate, even though I didn't have any jazz background, any background listening to jazz beforehand. But A Love Supreme took a little bit. But now I think, it has its place for a reason. I think the playing on it is phenomenal. I think it's pushing the boundaries of kind of tonality, modality, without really delving into the kind of Ornette Coleman brand of free jazz or even what Coltrane would explore in just the next year or two after that. It's the acclaim is obvious, so I won't dwell on it too much, but really happy to own it. Trying to build up, you'll probably hear me say this several times, trying to build up my jazz collection as gradually as I can. It's not very big right now. And a lot of the records I own are pretty standard purchases, pretty standard mainstays in people's collections, but I'm working on it. I don't really know what to say about this one because I got this as part of a collection, and I've never heard it. And I'm sure this is good because I know he was good at this back in his day, and there's Baggage. I guess this is I know nothing about this record. Bill Cosby to Russell, my brother, whom I slept with, from Cleveland, 1968, a live recording. Again, I never watched much of Cosby stand-up, so I know that he is incredibly influential. People say he's great. I'm sure he is. I'm sure I would and will laugh whenever I check his stuff out. But yeah, it still is a little bit weird to have a Cosby album just kind of sitting around in my collection, but whatever. I won't dwell on it. Again, I'm sure it is fun. All right. Cream, I have 2 records. This first one is absolutely destroyed. And I don't think the actual album is in very good shape either. There's some scratches on it. Fresh Cream. Very good album. Again, I don't think it compares. Like, Cream's best albums are the middle 2. I think the first one, this one, and then Goodbye, the last one, are noticeable steps down. But I do think there is an energy as far as how they kind of explode onto the scene here. I Feel Free, obviously being a great song. They perfect the sound a bit more on this album, the other Cream album I have, Disraeli Gears. Which, yeah, I think it's their best. I think if, I think this one could maybe be number 2. I cannot believe I'm blanking on the other, Wheels on Fire. I think if Wheels on Fire was maybe shorter, I might like the highs of that album a little bit more. But Disraeli Gears, I think, is pretty strong, just kind of goes at you from beginning to end. And as much as I think it does peak at the beginning with the first two songs, which everybody says, um, and as much as I honestly, I've heard a lot of psychedelic rock, psychedelic adjacent records from the late 60s, and as much as I think a lot of them kind of blend together, like there's a point where psychedelia honestly became a little bit annoying for me to listen to because of how many of these generic acts were kind of doing it. Um, Cream always has that sense of, I don't know if it's aggressiveness, I don't know what you want to call it, that pushes them ahead of everybody. Again, it feels like they're trailblazers, which, during this, period of time, 67, 68, etc., when, you had potentially the definition of trailblazers in the Beatles kind of leading the way. Really, any other bands who could be defined under those terms, I think that's a huge, huge statement to their credit. So Cream, Beach Boys, Doors, etc. Really great stuff. So it's been a while since I've heard any of their albums, actually, but will say the Ginger Baker documentary, the name of which escapes me, but it's on YouTube. Really fantastic watch, fantastic documentary. And it made me want to check out some of the other stuff like Ginger Baker's Air Force and the other bands that he was a part of. Just a phenomenal fantastic drummer and a captivating figure in life and indeed now in death. This record, amazingly, is one of the most valuable records I own. This is Willie and the Poor Boys by Creedence Clearwater Revival. This is apparently a 200-gram pressing of Willie and the Poor Boys. That came out, I think, in like 2014 or so. I bought this in 2016. This was actually one of the first albums that I bought on vinyl for an affordable price. I mean, it's $21. And now the resale value for this thing is, in it's like 150 almost, somehow. So this is, I guess, a very special reissue type of thing. Do I have a plan on selling it? No. But it's still it's one of those things where it's a release I didn't really expect to appreciate and value in the way that it has. I knew nothing about record collecting at the time. I was just trying to get records to build a collection. But yeah, Willie and the Poor Boys, it's either my favorite or my second favorite CCR album. It's the only one that I have, the only one that I have on vinyl. And I think Cosmo's Factory wins for being a more consistent record, but Poor Boys has the incredible singles, like Down on the Corner, Cotton Fields, Fortunate Son, obviously. So I think maybe the highs may be a little bit higher on this one compared to Cosmo's Factory. But the CCR really are, out of all the 60s bands, one of the most consistent. Again, if you kind of forget the last one or two albums of theirs ever really happened, they were remarkably consistent in not just in the product that they delivered, but in the quality of the product that they delivered. So that's why I think their discography ranking videos, if you watch any of those on YouTube, some of the most fascinating ones, because people's opinions will go around all over the place, because they are so remarkably consistent that just these little things, it's these little characteristics, and maybe one or two songs will be enough to jump one album up 3 to 4 spaces in the list. It's pretty remarkable. All right. Jim Croce. I love Jim Croce. One of my favorite 70s folk artists, and has been since I was a kid. This, ironically, we're starting with something I actually haven't heard, because this is a Jim and Ingrid Croce record, Another Day, Another Town. Before Jim went properly solo before he signed to, I think it was ABC. He was trying to make it initially as kind of a duo type of thing. Think of like an Ian and Sylvia type of idea with his wife Ingrid. And they released a couple of albums. They performed together for a while. And then I think that whole deal didn't work out. So they both kind of took a step back from music. And then Jim ended up getting a gig as a backup guitarist for, I think it's for Maury Mulesine, actually, the person who ended up becoming his backup guitarist. Anyways, long tangent. I haven't heard the Ingrid Croce stuff, but I'm sure that it would be interesting to hear him with a female performer to kind of bounce off of, because I think he and in Mulesine, I'm hoping I'm saying his name correctly. I think the two of them bounced off each other because Maury had this kind of higher tenor voice that really added to those high harmonies. You Don't Mess Around with Jim. This record is actually in terrible condition, so I've been kind of on the look for an upgrade. The cover is like completely shredded, and the record skips. But You Don't Mess Around with Jim to me is the highlight for sure. It's the record that establishes him. And if he had never made another record, I think his legacy would have been set from this alone. Not a dud on here. I mean, it's close to a 5-star album as far as just his songwriting style is very like homegrown, rugged, I guess, without sounding artificial. He doesn't really sound like an observer of America or any of the emotions or sentiments that he's kind of describing. He's not an observer, he's an experiencer. He's experiencing all these things, and it seems very authentic and genuine. So I think that's the appeal of Croce. And his melodies are spot on. And the guitar playing, he's a fantastic guitar player, and comparing him with Mulesine, the both of them together just create these amazing guitar licks. Operator, probably my favorite on that album specifically. Life and Times, his second proper solo album with ABC, and probably my least favorite of the three. But again, there's not a huge quality difference in any of these. I think they're all very consistent, very strong. This one maybe a little bit more, there's a bit more of the upbeat stuff on this album, and I do like Croce when he's more meditative and more sentimental. That's just what I'm naturally drawn to. I Got a Name, his final album that he released before his death. The title track is, I don't know if it's my favorite Jim Croce song, but it's the one that means the most to me. It's the one I have the strongest association with from my childhood. And this one, again, you have more of the ballads such as Lover's Cross, I'll have to say I Love You in a Song, things like that. The Hard Way Every Time. Working at the Car Wash Blues, I think, is pretty fucking hilarious. So, very strong. And then to top it off, this was the compilation that got me into Jim Croce as a kid that my parents got for me. Photographs and Memories, his greatest hits from 74, I believe. So about 2 years after his death. And it has not every essential song, of course, but a lot of the essential ones. And the texture of this record cover is really interesting, like the way the lettering is kind of embossed. It's pretty cool. All right, what else we got here? Close to the end. I have one random Bing Crosby album, and the reason that I own this one is because the cover is hilarious, which you'll see, and also this album is not available on streaming services or on YouTube, really. I think maybe like half the songs are available on YouTube. Bingo Viejo. This is from 77. So this was one of the last records he did before he died. It is a collection of songs written either by Mexican or Spanish composers or that utilize the Spanish language on some level. So you have several very like old standards. Besame Mucho, The Breeze and I, Frenesí, Green Eyes. A lot of these songs, that date from the American Songbook era. Actually, a lot of these that like, a lot of these songs were actually parts of some of the earliest Billboard charts. When I was doing research for a project I was trying to do regarding those, a lot of these appear in like the 1940, 41, 42 Billboard charts and either hit number one or really close to it. So obviously this stuff is in his wheelhouse. And the songs I've heard from that album they're fine. They're decent enough. From Bing Crosby to the recently departed David Crosby, so rest in peace. If I could only remember my name. I don't think I've heard another David Crosby album front to back, so I can't speak for how much better this is than the other Crosby solo albums. I would imagine it is better because there is Crosby just in general, both in his time with the Byrds and with Crosby, Stills and Nash, is such an interesting songwriter. But I think it always felt like he had to be a bit restrained to kind of meld into the sound that people like McGuinn, Clark, and whoever with the Byrds or Stills and Nash with CSN, he had to kind of restrain himself to fit in a little bit more. And in this debut album, he doesn't restrain himself. He goes full on into the psychedelia that he absolutely adored exploring in, and the kind of harder rock sounds. And the result is incredibly fascinating and really, really great. I think there's a small contingent of people, at least, who prefer that to like any Crosby, Stills and Nash album, as we're going to see in just a second. I don't believe that, but it is a really great record. And I'm curious to explore not really his 80s and 90s stuff as much, but definitely his 2010s stuff, because it seems like kind of the opposite of being experimental. They show Crosby in a much calmer state, in a nostalgic state, but not a Ringo Starr type of nostalgia where it's kind of obnoxious and over the top in his later years. It feels very calming. He's kind of taking influences from modern indie folk and indie pop and things like that, and kind of incorporating that into his records. So I look forward to exploring those at some point down the line. But in the meantime, Crosby, Stills, and Nash, self-titled record. This is my favorite CSN album, including the Neil Young stuff. I just think the energy they have on this album, I mean, they are, again, we're kind of talking about Crosby feeling like he's freed on his solo album, but really all three of them sound like they're creatively rejuvenated on this album. Stills is everywhere. I think this album is absolutely Stephen Stills' magnum opus, where he's performing so many of the instruments, writing so many of the songs, and Crosby and Nash, of course, both contributing their stuff, contributing the vocals. The harmony sound is phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. There's not a dud on this album. I think every song, even I don't know what my least favorite would be, maybe like Lady of the Island or something, but that's still really pretty. A really pretty acoustic Nash number. And even in the, you know, the other songs that aren't like constant radio mainstays, something like You Won't Have to Cry, 49 Bye-Byes, the harmonies uplift everything. Everything on this. One of the best vocal harmony albums ever. I love how versatile they are. You know, I think generally speaking, it's pretty standard that Stills is the low harmony, Crosby's in the middle, Nash is doing the high harmonies, but they'll bounce around a little bit, like Marrakesh Express. Songs where Graham Nash takes the, this is me nerding out about vocal harmony for a second, but songs where Graham Nash writes often, and where he ends up singing the melody line, Crosby will drop to the lower harmony, and then Stills will sing the higher harmony in falsetto. They do the same thing in a couple of songs off CSN, Just a Song Before I Go, for instance. And, you know, those little tweaks like that, or even Helplessly Hoping, there's a little bit of kind of vocal interplay where Crosby is singing in the middle at first, and then in the kind of bridge section, quote unquote, they are one person, they're two alone, they're three together. Crosby goes down to the low harmony at that point. You know, I love that kind of back and forth, is what I'm trying to say, and what I'm geeking out about. And they do it a lot on that record, which I really love. I do really love Deja Vu too, and I love the album cover. Or I should say the cover's cool. I mean the sleeve, I guess, primarily. Just love the texture and how it feels. Adding Neil Young to the fray just adds another element to their sound. Again, maybe it's a little bit disorienting that he's not on every song. He kind of is, what is he on, like 2/3 of them or something. But I don't know why I don't like this one quite as much as CSN, except that maybe it doesn't sound quite as fresh in some ways. I like that Neil Young is added there, but I think this makes them sound more like a super group in the kind of we know we're the shit type of fashion. Like Crosby, Stills, and Nash, that album sounds like they're trying to prove themselves. This one sounds like we know we're the shit and we're just going to go ahead and drive forward. And I don't love the Neil songs on here, if I'm being perfectly honest. Neil Young's an artist who, full disclosure, I have not clicked with as much as I want to, and have not explored nearly as much as I want to. But admittedly, the Neil songs on that album are not among my favorites. I've only heard parts of this live album, Four-Way Street, but the parts I have heard are really great compilation of different live performances with the CSNY lineup. And a lot of songs that you cannot find on studio albums as well, which is part of the benefit of it. I know there are people in my circle who claim that's one of the greatest live albums of all time, and I'm not going to disagree with that. Certainly, at least as far as the era goes. But again, I've not heard it all the way through, so TBD. I have 2 copies of this album for some reason. CSN from 77, the reunion album, as it were. This is Crosby, Stills, and Nash do Yacht Rock. I mean, and that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing, most of the time. But you definitely lose a lot of the edge on this record. You are here for the smoothness of the harmonies. The guitars here are, they're not as aggressive. Again, they're kind of sliding in. Like this is preparing you for the mediocrity that is going to be Crosby, Stills, and Nash, and sometimes Young for the remainder of time. But it still comes through with some really strong tracks. I like how it opens with Shadow Captain and See the Changes. I think Cathedral is a fantastic Graham Nash song. And yeah, there's some other good stuff on there too. Kind of preparing you for what's to come. Here's the other copy, in case you want to see that. The only other one that I have on vinyl, I do actually have all their stuff on CD, is Daylight Again from 82, I believe. You know, Crosby famously is not on this album all that much because of his own kind of drug problems and legal problems, I think, at that time. So they have other vocalists like Timothy B. Schmidt and Art Garfunkel who jump into the mix. Schmidt is definitely credited on here. I don't think Garfunkel is. But like on Southern Cross, for instance, Garfunkel is very, very prominent singing what would normally be the Crosby part in the harmony stack, which is really interesting. Kind of a forgotten association, I feel like, in the CSN history. But no, it's not like, it's a step down from where CSN was. And CSN, for a lot of people, I don't think excites, doesn't always offer a lot of excitement. And Daylight Again, I think, offers even less. I do like Southern Cross, although I do have one memory of my family was going to see the Eagles in concert in Minneapolis. And this was their like reunion tour. So this was after like Glenn Frey died, and so Deacon Frey was in there and Vince Gill was in the band. And Jimmy Buffett was opening, and I think Southern Cross has been a pretty regular part of Jimmy Buffett's set list for a long time, but I didn't know that at the concert. So when I heard it, I was like, wait, what? That's a Jimmy Buffett song? No, it can't be. And of course it was not, and it was CSN. But I still shudder at the memories of the Jimmy Buffett concert and seeing people in all these middle-aged, you know, upper class folks, I suppose, in these like beach shorts and shit like that, throwing around like beach balls and seeing all these the crazy like stage setup that Buffett had. I don't know. I don't mean to get on a tangent with that, but Borderline is Daylight Again is not very good, but it does get worse after that. But I do not have any more Crosby, Stills, and Nash, so I will not be discussing any of that. And in fact, that's all I have for today. So, as always, thank you so much for watching. Please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. More videos, more record collection videos, and reviews are to come. So, be sure to check those out. Tell a friend. And until next time, I will see you right here at your home of the Music Deep Dive. Bye now.